Hello and welcome back to another session with Deep Dive with OA. I am Omar Abedin, Project Director at the National Incubation Center, Karachi, and today I have two very special guests with me, Muzaffar and Muhammad. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Umar. Great to
Now,
be here.
there is a third person in this dynamic team. Ibrahim is with us in spirit. He's sending us good thoughts and prayers. In case you're wondering, these three gentlemen made the news last week when they raised a $1.3 million round for their startup, Farmdar. So today we're going to talk about their journey and the journey of Farmdar. So let's get into it, shall we, gentlemen?
Let's get into it.
All right. So why don't we start with intros? Just please quickly introduce yourselves.
So I'm Muhammed Bukhari. My background is strategy and finance. But more importantly, actually, and more specific to Farmdar, I come from a farming family in Pakistan. And that's really where the journey for Farmdar began.
Okay. And what were you doing before Farmdar?
I was GM for home broadband commercial for BT, British Telecom, in London. So I've recently moved back, actually. It's only been about 10 days. Yes.
Literally just 10?
Literally just 10 days.
Oh, good God. Fresh off the boat. Welcome home.
Indeed. Thank you.
But
you. It's great to be back.
Yeah, something yahin ka hi hai.
Bilkul.
Desi hai.
So you can take the Lahori out of Lahore, but, you know.
No. First day he landed, he's like, let's order Food Panda. A couple of days later, he's saying, oh, Food Panda. so
that is true as well.
ये कोई वापस नहीं है, ये है ही पाकिस्तान.
Okay. Just took 2 days to revert.
Yes, that's right.
Excellent. Welcome back to Pakistan.
Thank you.
Muzaffar.
Every startup needs a college dropout. I'm that one. So, we meet the criteria of the cliche. I'm an advertising guy. I've been in advertising since I was 20. Just started off as a copywriter, as a proofreader actually. Bas been advertising and marketing. 4-5 साल पहले अपनी agency खोली. That did all right, but and still, doing what it does. And Mohammed's an old friend of mine. We kind of started talking about this idea about 2 years ago, and just one thing led to another, and here we are, pretty much.
So talk us through those early discussions, like what, because a lot of people in Pakistan talk about ideas, but very few actually say, okay, you know what, time to execute. How did that pan out?
So I think there was 2 elements to it. The first was that Ibrahim and I were kind of exporting our produce from the farm. And when we did that, it was quite an eye-opening experience, हम लोग समझते थे कि हमारे mangoes, for example, are the best in the world and things like that. And actually they are. However, in the international markets, we simply can't compete with some other countries. So we realized very quickly when we exported that our quality was very poor. So we went on this journey to try and do something about it. And initially we were focused on sort of the supply chain side. So we looked at, modified atmosphere packaging, we looked at cold chain, we used reefer containers, we even switched to sort of air freight. And what we realized was if your underlying quality is bad, all these things are sort of sticky plasters on top,
Right.
So they'll give you an extra 7 to 10 days, but your product is still poor quality. And that's where we really started experimenting with sort of drones, multispectral cameras, IoT sensors, satellite imagery on our own farms. And we saw like a step change. Not only were we addressing quality issues, our yield was going up, our input costs were reducing, we were using less water, so it was almost a virtuous circle, right? And that's really when the initial realization came. But really, there was a catalyzing moment as well. Like Muzaffar had his own advertising agency, and he was running this campaign, which basically was around $10,000 ad campaigns, So I remember getting in touch with Muzaffar and saying, can you make me an app for $10,000? And, that conversation is where actually, the rubber met the road, is what I would say.
He would have been better off, like, if he just stuck to $10,000, because now we're like partners in this. So there's no महंगा पड़ा इसको.
सही है भाई. पुराने दोस्तों के साथ ऐसे ही होते हैं.
बिल्कुल.
So
no, but early conversations. I mean, I just want to add that anyone, there's a lot of great ideas you'll hear, and young people today just have like, a lot of exposure. They're doing a lot of things, shorter attention span. So you'll meet a lot of people with some very, very good ideas, and young people these days have a lot of exposure. They want to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. So दिमाग में बहुत सारी चीजें चल रही हैं. तो ideas बहुत सारे हैं, but the real, I mean, if I look back to the earlier days, which by the way weren't that long ago, it's about finding bandwidth to pursue that idea. Because everyone's got a job, everyone's got work, everyone's got kitchens to run, and wife and kids, and life doesn't stop for your ideas, right? And the early conversations, I feel, once you've got an idea or a spark of an idea, really spending time with that idea in terms of bandwidth is the first step for those conversations to be fruitful. And I think we were lucky because हम तीनों के बीच में एक पुरानी दोस्ती थी. So every phone call used to be a let's catch up, and it's nice to hear from a friend. But those calls would go from like 10-minute catch-ups to ghante ki conversations. So we're lucky that we're friends, because when we speak to each other, it wasn't always a work call. It didn't feel like a work call. The point I'm trying to make is that in early days, when you have an idea, spending time with that idea is very important. You have to spend a lot of hours on it, and that can only come when you've diverted that mental bandwidth to that idea. You place it as a priority. वरना ideas तो बहुत सारे होते हैं, उस idea पे time आपको लगाना होता है.
Yeah.
It's very interesting Muzaffar mentions that, because I have slightly, I guess, slightly different maybe perspective on this, which is that I naturally have a bias towards action. So कभी-कभी ये होता था कि हम लोगों की बातें होती थी, and I would just be eager to like do something, right? Enough talking, let's do something. So that I think also sort of propelled us a little bit. And at times maybe we did things that were a little bit silly and like, but in my opinion, actually, this is embedded in Farmdar's DNA now a little bit as well. We don't, as a company, fear failure. We like experimenting. So, because we feel that actually, okay, if you've tried something and you failed, you've learned from it, like you'll do it better next time. And this helps us a lot on the product side, because as a deep tech company, we're always like exploring use cases, developing kind of solutions for problems and things. So that bias to action, I think, is quite important earlier on as well. And I think एक founders के अंदर ये भी बड़ा ज़बरदस्त dynamic था, You had thinkers, you had visionaries, you had kind of doers, and that interaction I think was great.
There was a lot of conversations along the line of यार हफ्ता पहले बात की थी अभी तक इस पे कर क्यों नहीं? Why are we not acting on it?
Sure.
That was like, it was a very high priority for I mean, as a culture of three people कि यार बातों के साथ साथ फिर इस पे कुछ action भी लेना है. Otherwise they just talk. You can't have the second leg of the conversation unless you've at least done something about the first leg, or at least made a few phone calls and tried to validate what you were thinking, which is a form of action as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when did this start taking a formal shape? Because so now it's been several weeks, months of three friends chatting about an idea, which is getting clearer and clearer. When do you start to formalize things?
I think it's an interesting one. We had sort of gone and white labeled a couple of products that we tested on our own farm. So from an creating something perspective, I think that was probably the first step. But really, I think once we did that, what really kicked us off was discussions around where are we going to take this? Are we actually going into farm advisory? Are we going to produce data for agriculture? Are we going to aim at a particular segment and things like that? And I think जब हम लोगों ने एक ये चीज़ very early on decide की that we want to actually do this at a large scale. Let's think big. All three founders were quite kind of focused on that. We didn't want to do something small. I think we came to the realization that actually VC funding or kind of funding of any kind would actually be quite necessary on that journey, right? Because we wanted to go big. And once we started sort of talking to VCs, I think our first event was Step Pakistan.
Yeah.
It was quite eye-opening, right? Like, because we saw actually what needed to be done, what we had to do to go and kind of like make an impact at that level that sort of VCs would be interested in speaking to us and things. And I think that also focused us a lot in terms of the business itself, because we needed a coherent story. In order to get that coherent story, we had to work out exactly how we would do it. We needed like basic planning. We need to create a sort of simple financial model and things like that, So that really got, I think, it felt as if we were more of a business than just friends spitballing an idea at that stage, right?
So on this, adding on to what he's saying, or maybe a parallel thought, in the process of building things out, and making mistakes as you go along. Of course, mistakes are going to happen, and everyone makes mistakes. And the bigger you are, the better you are at covering those mistakes, or kind of repackaging them into "ke oh hum to karna hi ye cha rahe the" type. So you don't hear about Facebook's mistakes, but you and I both know they screw up all the time. But mistakes themselves have to be treated as planned mistakes, right? And I want to refer back to a conversation we had amongst ourselves when we were walking into this VC event. We knew that हमारी information is मौजू पे limited थी. हमारा बहुत ज़्यादा VC interaction नहीं हुआ. We might have met VCs, we might have had dinners with them, but never as a startup talking to a VC. It was people we knew, and that's a very different context. So we knew that there's going to be feedback. और उसी nature का feedback हमें वापस आया कि यार ये कहानी आपकी समझ नहीं आई. So it gave us food for thought, and we built that out from there. So on the subject of making mistakes, I would encourage people to make planned mistakes. Those are better than random ones. You contain the level of destruction they cause.
Sure. So at what point did you decide to join an incubation center like Nick? Or the Founder Institute program, for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. So very early on, we realized that there's a very rapidly brewing ecosystem. And investors over there, a lot of talents over there, a lot of like-minded conversation. And if you want to surround yourself with a certain kind of people, you become like that. And we wanted to become a part of that ecosystem because nobody really knew us. मैं कराची में, ये लंदन में, third partner लाहौर में, मतलब so it's we weren't really networking in the scene like that either, nor are we that sort to be found at like these iftar parties and dinners in that frequency either. So we did a little research. A couple of names stuck out, which we felt were the more organized entities or organizations. NIC was definitely one of them. FI was one of them. So he took on FI because it requires smarter people. I don't have the brains for something like that. So, that was passed on to him.
I can testify.
Not to say that stupid people flourish better in IC, but this seemed to be...
I hope that's not what you meant, but sure.
Not saying that either, but NIC because Karachi mein main baitha hoon, so it made more sense. And so, it was a fairly obvious choice where we should park ourselves in terms of where we should get incubated.
Yeah, I think it became really apparent to us that we had to embed ourselves in the Pakistani ecosystem, right? I say that as I was actually not even in the country at the time, right? And it felt as if, as a founding team, as an organization, we were sort of at the periphery, right? And we had done one or two events, like I mentioned, but really nobody knew about us. And our plan really was to, okay, let's go out there, let's find the forums and platforms that are there. And really, at the beginning, at least for me, it was fairly indiscriminate, right? Let's just go and press buttons and see what else is out there. And I think it became very clear to us what the quality ones were very quickly, and NIC was 100% one of them, We've benefited a lot by being a Cohort 8 company for the NIC, right? Like, it's been an amazing journey. And I think not only was it because we had space to grow, like, for example, the amazing building here, or indeed, like, mentorship, guidance from people like yourselves and others in the industry, but actually using the NIC's name also helped. Like, when we put on our pitch deck who our partners were Nick was definitely there. And I think it holds weight. So there's a selection process and people kind of give you the benefit of the doubt when they know that you've been part of a Nick cohort. So, it really helped. But main cheez ye thi ke mera experience tha that I really liked how easy it was for us to get embedded in the ecosystem through platforms like Nick, through FI. And really it showed that the Pakistani ecosystem was thriving and it had like the right platforms where startups like us could join them and actually really get embedded in the Pakistani ecosystem. So
Absolutely. The entire ecosystem, and especially in the last couple of months, I've seen it kind of evolve. जब से हमारा उस तरह से interaction शुरू हुआ है, entire ecosystem is just very, very pro startup right now. I mean, if someone's got an idea and they're they're half serious about doing something about it, there are organizations waiting to help you do it. They will hold your hand, they will call you and pester you. And I mean, at the get-go, if you're requiring calls and pestering, you've taken the wrong path. But यहाँ तक इदारे करने को तैयार हैं. And just the amount of support available to startups, it's actually quite shocking. हम बोलते हैं पाकिस्तान इतना बैकवर्ड है, मुझे तो कहीं से नहीं लगा कि ये इस इकोसिस्टम में स्टार्टअप इंक्यूबेशन एंड एक्सेलरेशन में इतने एडवांस लेवल के ऊपर सपोर्ट एक्सटेंड हो रहा है. I thought it was pretty fantastic.
Good to hear. So
Yeah.
because I was watching both of you guys on different forums, right? So Muzaffar here was in every weekly NIC mentoring session, advisory session. You were holding the fort at the FIN. And every week I would see that you could see the results of what had happened last week. Like you would be saying stuff that we had discussed with Muzaffar, and Muzaffar would have a pitch deck that had stuff that was discussed at FI. So it was really, I mean, for me, it was an eye-opener on how founders can really divide and conquer, really maximize, optimize their time, because time is the finite resource, right? Money and all of that comes much
Absolutely.
later. But the fact that, you divided and conquered and really maximized what you got out of FI. Like, I remember sessions where it was you guys talking. And there were like 7 other founders on the call, and no one had anything to say. But you guys were in there, एक mentor से मतलब specific सवाल. It was like a one-on-one consulting session, because you guys really took the time to, suck it out. So,
Well, thank you. Divide and conquer is a term that we've used a number of times because we realize that each founder, irrespective of your core competence, you need to split things up. You can't be doing everything at the same time. But what I do want to throw back to you is, jahan hum aa rahe the ready with questions, we used to call each other right after our calls and be like, how did it go? अच्छा यार, आज इसने ये सवाल पूछा, मेरे पास जवाब नहीं था, लूज बॉल आई थी, अगले सेशन में ये आने लगा है, ओके इसको इस वजह से हमने ये इन्फॉर्मेशन एक्सट्रैक्ट करनी है. सो यू हैव टू बी प्लान्ड अबाउट इट. देखें, इट्स लाइक एनी अपॉर्चुनिटी, राइट? इट्स लाइक गोइंग टू स्कूल. You find out a good professor to join your college. Yeah, you'd be stupid not to take the best out of it, But what I want to throw back to you is that the ecosystem was very happy to give that.
Absolutely.
There was no resistance we met on any level.
Absolutely.
There was no mentor, there was no consultant, there was no guest speaker who was withholding information. And it's not just a matter of informational transaction. It's them wanting to give you their time.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the ecosystem so good for startups.
Look, absolutely, I would agree. I think everyone was very generous with their time, with their advice, with their kind of knowledge, and it really benefited us.
For sure.
I do want to add that you mentioned those 2 forums. I think what was also happening is in the middle of those 2 forums, we were having loads of other conversations.
Of course.
Right? And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that actually, as founders, you have to knock on every door. It really does fall down to a numbers game, especially if you're fundraising. You need to knock on as many doors as possible.
So that's a great segue. So let's talk about the fundraising journey, because for you guys, it's been light speed, right? I remember seeing one particular session, we were talking about it earlier, where one of the mentors got extremely excited. Okay, let's name him. Wahaj was one of our mentors that day. He got so excited when you finished pitching. He was like, what are you guys doing? What do you do? You need to be raising $10 million now.
I do.
And then, he then stepped up and he introduced you to a VC who introduced you to a VC who introduced you to a VC.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, talk through that journey a little bit.
What's really important, I think, is to, as I said, like, knock as many doors as possible. Because that increases the chances of having meetings like that with Bahaj, right? And what a lovely guy, right? Like, so helpful, and we were supposed to
just a gem. Yeah,
total
absolutely.
gem,
Yeah.
total gem. But I think it's a numbers game, number one. Secondly, the more conversations you have, the more practiced you also become. And then actually you also get used to sort of rejection, because that's part of the package, right? If you're raising money, have 200, 300, 500 conversations, and some of them will be super fruitful and most of them will not materialize into anything. But the ones that don't teach you just as much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You hear a lot of different perspectives. You hear a lot of different theses from like the investors. And I think what actually I understood through that journey was it wasn't just us trying to find cash for investment. We were actually looking for the right investors.
For sure.
You know?
For sure.
So that was part of the learning process. And, we were trying to do something in a market in a certain way. And some investors have a thesis. And, when those two things come together, that's when you sort of make the magic, right? Like, so the more people you speak to, the more theses you come across, and then you can select the ones that really matter to you most.
So I think very early on into our journey, so when we started off, I mean, like, yeah, we'll be seeking out investment. That was on the cards, but it wasn't something like a driving force. Like, आमतौर पे startup जब शुरू होती है, तो उसका पहला होता है कि get investment, right? And we kind of built out a product. We were making money off that product. We knew it was on the cards, but it wasn't a burning priority. We went to a VC conference and we're like, okay, this is more readily available than we had anticipated. And last year was just fantastic news for all startups looking for funding. So we said, okay, capital always helps you grow much faster, and if it's happening, then sure. But it was evident that money itself is not going to help you grow, and I would encourage any startup to make sure they're very clear about whom they're taking investment from and why that investor in particular. What are you bringing besides the money? It could be just moral support. We spoke to this one guy and he had a startup as well. He's like, what I'll bring you is when the chips are down and you're really, demotivated, call me and I'll lift you up. That's value, because that does happen and that will happen. Yeah. This is exhausting. If you have a startup and you want to grow it, it's brutal. If it's not brutal, you're not doing it hard enough. If it's not breaking you, you're not doing it right.
Dude, he's just full of these one-liners today. What is happening with him? I'm going to quote another one of your one-liners in just a minute.
They're for sale, actually. I have a separate startup where we sell these.
Muzaffar's one-liners.
तो ये मैं बेचूंगा आपको थोड़ी में. So it's a volumes game. So 5 रुपए के.
Advertising बंदा है ना.
बिल्कुल.
Absolutely.
No, but actually, like you ought to be driving it really hard, and having an investor who can support you in functions outside of money, absolutely critical. And we really lucked out. It's kind of like we were hoping to assemble a team of individuals and VCs who could come together and be a part of Team Farmdar and we got the dream team. I think like there's nobody on that list we didn't hope for 6 months ago. Luck has a lot to do with it. I'm not saying हमने कोई बहुत ज़्यादा फनकारी कर दिया है. नसीब पे भी बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. Right time, right place. I mean, but then you create your own nasiib as well, I guess. I don't know. So you got to extract from that conversation outside money. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Knock on as many doors as possible. Like I couldn't stress that enough.
For you guys, it was over 100, right?
I would say definitely over 100, probably closer to 120, something like that. Serious conversations, right?
Sure.
Like probably we attended loads of events and forums, which I'm not including in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, talk to as many people as you can. And another thing that I wanted to mention, look, you were very kind. You mentioned it was lightning fast. In hindsight, it does feel a little bit lightning fast, but actually a lot of effort and time went into it.
Of course.
Absolutely. And truly, it's not a quick journey. Like, it takes you time to do the pitches, do the rounds. Actually, even once something has been agreed, the process of actually signing documents, closing the round, all of that takes time.
It is. And people tend to lose hope. They tend to become despondent. They give up. And
it's easy to feel that way. It is.
Yeah, I mean,
for sure.
Certainly, we had moments like that.
Plenty of them.
I think it goes hand in hand with being a founder, to be honest. And they're not necessarily restricted to just fundraising. Yeah.
No.
Money's not going to solve that problem. You will be faced with that again and again.
So again, good segue into the problem that Farmdar is trying to solve. And the reason I'm smiling is because I've been trying to work this statement of yours into a question. So you earlier said that
Oh
that
God, what did I say?
that Pakistan is an extremely over-fertilized country.
I did say
And
that.
we had a laugh because it works at so many levels. But please help us to understand what is Farmdar doing and why is this such a burning issue for Pakistan?
I'll let him take this one.
Sure. So Dekhenji, there's number one, I want to frame Pakistan and agriculture in Pakistan, if I can, in a few words. It's a huge part of what we do as a country, right? Not just economically, in terms of culture, in terms of labor force, in terms of people's lifestyles and things like that, you know?
Yeah.
And also, it's our massive advantage. So as a startup founder, I'm always searching for what are kind of unique advantages as Farmdar, unfair advantages, right? And Pakistan's unfair advantage is agriculture. But it's underutilized. So if you look at us as producers of food, we are in the top 10 for a number of crops: rice, wheat,
Top
sugar.
5 for a number of crops.
Yeah, exactly.
But bottom 5 in terms of
Well,
Production. Very low.
bottom 50 in terms of productivity, yield
Yeah.
per acre.
Yeah.
So the first and kind of fundamental problem is that actually we have a massive yield gap in Pakistan. Now, there's multiple reasons for that, but and they're getting accentuated. So, for example, we're facing the brunt of climate change. I mean, the recent heat wave, for example, has hurt farmers quite a bit in multiple crops. इसी तरह पानी के बहुत मसले हो रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में. Water scarcity is a big issue. And farming practices haven't evolved for a long time. So when Muzaffar said Pakistan is a massively over-fertilized country, the main reason for that is our approach to agriculture is a blanket approach. So when an average farmer in Pakistan applies fertilizer in the land, they flood it, right? When they irrigate land, they flood it. And there are some kind of, amazing solutions for this, like, for example, drip irrigation. But they're expensive and they're out of the reach of your normal average farmer. So where Farmdar comes in is we actually provide actionable insights to farmers using remote sensing. So, for example, satellites and IoT sensors and things. Designed in a way that our reports are very easy to understand. So you don't have to be tech literate, or indeed you don't even have to be literate to be able to understand what our reports say. And so what we allow farmers to do is basically, improve their practices, start to improve their yields, start to reduce their input costs, to not over-fertilize, to not overwater, and still be able to improve their quality and increase their yield. That's essentially what we do as a company.
And I was kind of horrified to find out that some of the leading quality assessment companies that look at soil and really try and figure out where the nutrient gaps are and all of that are actually not great at what they do. I think that's the most diplomatic way that I can put it.
Yeah, I mean, look, let me approach it this way, right? Think of Farmdar as a blood test and a diagnostic, right? So what we do is we use the best information available globally to give you an amazing blood test, and we do a diagnosis. What we are not doing at the moment is a prescription and the advice on top. So आप हमारे पास आते हो, हमारे से ब्लड टेस्ट कराते हो, हम आपको डायग्नोस्टिक देते हैं. बेस्ट ये है कि आप वो एक डॉक्टर के पास लेके जाओ, वो आपको प्रिस्क्रिप्शन लिख के देगा और फिर आप जाके एक फार्मेसी से मेडिसिन उठाओ, राइट? The advisory prescription side, there's lots of people involved in that, right? But what we want to do is provide them the best possible data to give the best advice they can to the farmer. And I think perhaps one of the reasons that that's not happening today is somebody like us has been missing in the ecosystem. So we hope that by entering the ecosystem, we can not only enable the existing, some very large organizations to be able to provide a better, more value-added service, but hopefully, as we grow at some stage, we ourselves will start to look at the prescription and also the advice side of things.
Seems like a logical next step.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be lateral growth for us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, I mean, you're using deep tech anyway, so enabling an AI bot type जो पंजाबी में किसी को बता दे कि यार आपने ये वाली चीज़ करनी है, इसको इस तरह कर लें.
बिल्कुल.
It seems logical.
And देखिए आपका जो point था about maybe services could be better. In a old school, not tech-enabled world, actually some of these things are very difficult to do. So if you want to test a soil sample, for example, you have to physically collect it, you have to transport it. Now, the right way to transport it, अगर आप world standards पे देखें तो उसको आप एक tube में डालो, उस tube को आप एक refrigerated
It's a
container में
biohazard,
डालो,
like-
Bacteria,
yeah,
microorganisms,
yes,
all of that
exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
आप उसको immediately test करो ताकि वो stale ना हो रहा हो sample and things like that, right? But however, because it's difficult, उसके अंदर भी challenges हैं. You have to stand up labs have to do analysis at scale and things like that.
And getting the samples to the lab. मतलब
Yeah.
shopper में जब आप bike पे लगा के लेके जा रहे हैं, because that's the only mechanism in place really.
Sure.
So I mean your sample is, I'm not saying this happens every time, but the likelihood of contamination is high.
Yeah.
At the get-go.
Well, I mean, what I found hard to digest was that you're giving a blood sample from an individual taken at the same time in the same location to 5 different labs, and they're giving you back 5 different test results. I mean,
So look,
Actual blood labs do that as well. by the way. I'm just letting
I'm
you
not
know.
going there.
no, fair enough.
I'm not going
Fair
there.
enough.
But that's the scale of the problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And देखें इसमें there's a number of issues that could occur, right? You could have logistical issues. So somebody just mixed stuff up, for example, human error involved in it, right? You could have issues where a sample is left out on a shelf somewhere for a few days. And so there's a whole myriad of issues that could exist, right? Where we fit in is we can do it in real time, right?
And
So
upload it straight to the cloud.
straight to the cloud, straight to a device where you can kind of view your results straight away. And actually, we want our system to be as kind of like customizable as possible for our B2B clients. So if you have an existing ERP system, the results go straight into that.
Yeah.
They don't even have to be on our particular platform, right?
And slot into a dashboard that they can look at.
Exactly. And they have the best clinicians who can look at that data and give the best advice to farmers, right? So I think we're just really excited to operate that deep tech, high accuracy, fast, reliable information provider space in Pakistan because it's really missing.
I think the two
I think,
pivots
I
would
think
be
it's just
would be
generally missing.
Yeah.
Fast, accurate, reliable
Accuracy
data in
and
Pakistan.
speed, yeah.
In any field is missing.
Yeah.
So
accuracy and speed are what's really been lacking. But interestingly, well before even we came along and we thought of this, the desire for such data is shockingly high at B2B level and on the farmer level. People want to know. They're not getting around to doing anything about it. But if you just ask them a very open-ended question, इस तरह की चीज़ आपको चाहिए कि नहीं चाहिए? बिल्कुल चाहिए. There is a need.
abhi chahiye.
बिल्कुल चाहिए. हाँ, फौरन चाहिए.
Because every day is a cost. right?
Absolutely.
It's time lost, money lost. You put the wrong fertilizer on the soil is ruined for a year.
Yeah.
So it's not something you can fix overnight either once you've put the wrong fertilizer in the wrong place. So amazing. Like I have so many more technical questions, but I think we'll save something for the fireside chat
For sure.
as well. What advice do you have for young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs at NIC? You've met a lot of them. You've seen the kind of challenges that early stage startups in Pakistan are facing. What advice do you guys have for them?
My first piece of advice would be to think big, right? Don't restrict yourselves to super small issues that can't be scaled. Pakistan's a large country with a large population, and there's multiple problems to be solved. Pick a problem that is a core problem for a particular, either cohort or segment, but it should be scaled. Apply yourselves to something that has big impacts, I would say, would be my advice.
I'd like to say tenacity. You have to, not to be confused with being stubborn, but you have to be ready to not back off at any stage. It's what will drive growth. It's what will help you overcome challenges. And what a startup needs more than anything else is the conviction of the people around you. And that's not going to happen by itself. In fact, by virtue of being an idea that's ideally never been done before, you will lack conviction from other people. and you'll only get it when you're so strong in your belief, and you've absolutely decided to do this no matter what. It's infectious. So हिम्मत ना हारना और बहुत जोर से जुड़ जाना उस कॉज को बहुत लाजमी है.
अच्छा, एक और चीज़ है जो आई थिंक particularly relevant है given our current economic or the state of the markets and things like that. It's really important to pivot and to be able to be adaptable as a startup. You know, us ourselves at the moment, given the current circumstances, even we are looking at, how do we reduce our exposure? How do we double down on segments that are really, really important, right? So I think those kinds of questions, you always have to be open-minded to change and pivoting, because sometimes even if you are pivoting and making the wrong kind of calls, and as long as a founding team, as an organization, you're open to sort of maneuvering, you'll be fine. Because otherwise, अगर आप एक चीज़ में फंस जाओगे in this fast-moving startup space, it becomes really tricky.
Yeah. Awesome. One last thing. Can you give a shout out to Nick?
Absolutely. Look, I personally really, really love Nick. You guys have been amazing for us as founders. We've learned personally quite a lot, but for Farmdar, it's just been phenomenal. I would encourage anyone who is considering the startup ecosystem, the startup space in Pakistan, to apply to Nick. It will just give you bags and bags and bags of benefits. Amazing.
Absolutely. I give my
Absolutely. What is absolutely? What he said.
Pretty much, because
he said everything.
He said everything.
You don't get away that easy, bro. Come on.
No, NIC is fantastic. NIC is fantastic. There's a lot of good options to choose from. So I won't say that NIC, एक ही है तो अच्छा है. बहुत सारे अच्छों में NIC बहुत अच्छा लगा है. Support system बड़ा अच्छा है. Encouragement बहुत अच्छी है. The kind of events, talks, speakers, and having access to all of those, very important for a startup. There's certain thing from a legal perspective which hadn't even shown up on my radar until you guys arranged a call with a particular, legal representative. So from that aspect, I mean, it's very multidimensional, the entire experience. The fact that you have a lovely office really, really helps. You immediately feel कि मैं अच्छी जगह में काम कर रहा हूँ, and that really helps. It gives you a sense of being a part of something much bigger. I've really enjoyed being at NIC. So, well, we're here right now.
Yeah.
I mean, even now.
I mean, the fact that you're visiting us for the first time is fantastic.
Absolutely. It's so amazing to be here. It doesn't feel like the first time. Because of course, like I've
No, it
spoken to you
doesn't.
so
No,
many
it doesn't.
times, and like it's amazing to meet face to face, but like it doesn't feel like the first time. The coffee is incredible, by
Yeah.
the way.
Oh, wow.
The canteen
Really
coffee
nice.
is really good.
Yeah. But we only have one. We don't have any fancy coffee machines, but we have a guy who works really hard.
It's good coffee.
Really awesome coffee.
Okay, well, that's a thank you both.
It's a
very
huge
much.
plus point.
You can't get along without it, right?
Yeah.
There will come a point in the day where you're just like, where's my... I need caffeine.
Where's my 19th cup of coffee?
Yeah, it's a big plus. Gentlemen,
Thank you.
Omar, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Real pleasure.
I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as we've enjoyed taping this podcast. So from NIC Karachi, we're signing off. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Allah Hafiz.